research for this to try and sort of put the skeptics side to this debate was even actually this morning, the last bit of research I did about thermite, looking at what Stephen Jones says about thermite and thermite residue that was allegedly found in the dust of the Twin Trade Towers. It was really quite a strange experience because I found myself like on the edge of thinking, my God, I can't explain this. You know, I actually had that kind of experience that I think a lot of truthers have, where you go, my God, you know, I am actually presented with a piece of evidence here that is so difficult to refute that you feel like the whole sort of like house of cards is going to come tumbling down in your mind. And you think, you know, my God, maybe there really, really is something to this and I'm going to have to totally alter my worldview. But I did do a little bit more research after that and found myself, you know, having to swing backwards and forwards. But I just wanted to say that I haven't, you know, it's not that I haven't experienced that feeling of kind of, oh my God, you know, can this actually be refuted? But I'll come back to that in a second. The first thing I want to sort of say is, by the way, I'm going to deal with free fall, and I will deal with Building 7, and I will deal with thermite in a bit. But I just wanted to put a little bit of context to this debate, because I know that a lot of people feel that if you do take a sceptical attitude to the idea of controlled demolition, it's almost as if just sort of morally reprehensible, as if perhaps you're sort of taking the side of the neocons, and somehow that you're comfortable with the idea that George Bush is an okay president and that the war in Iraq is okay. I think there is that sort of sense sometimes from people that maybe you've sort of defected to the side of the neocons by questioning the whole sort of the idea that it was actually a controlled inside job theory. So I just wanted to say that I am actually a political activist. I have been for 30 years. I've blockaded and trespassed nuclear bases. I've stayed at various protest camps, Newbury and so on and so forth. I helped pull down fences at the G8 protests up in Glen Eagles. I locked onto a concrete barrel to block a war to block a war. That's the one thing I didn't do, to block a road during the protest. Anyway, and so on and so forth. So, you know, if you are taking a sceptical position and you are questioning this whole concept of a controlled demolition, it doesn't necessarily mean that your politics are somehow sort of aligned to the neocons and to those who took us into what I think are completely unjustified wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. I'm not saying that's the skeptics' position, that's my personal position, that those wars were reprehensible and shouldn't have happened. But, you know, just want to make that point that it's not always that you're coming from the right-wing point of view if you question the idea of a controlled demolition. Just because I've done political activity doesn't mean that I'm right about 9/11. Of course it doesn't. I might be a particularly stupid radical campaigner who's completely gullible and cannot actually sort of process information in a way that's useful. I hope that's not true, but you know, there's no guarantee just because I've done some actions that I'm right about anything. Not at all. Obviously it does come down to the evidence. One final last thing is also I used to believe in the JFK idea. I think the idea that Lee Harvey Oswald couldn't possibly have killed Kennedy was something that I sold into quite a bit when I was younger, partly on sort of the basis of just watching Bill Hicks's stuff. I mean, I just absolutely adore Bill Hicks's work, and some of his sketches, when somebody like that is so influential on the way you think, I did find myself sort of edging towards this stuff about, you know, come on, the conventional story, the establishment story doesn't make sense. And of course Oliver Stone's JFK film was very influential as well. So, you know, it's not like I don't know what it's like to be taking a conspiracy position. And from some of the political campaigning I've done, for instance, the anti-consumerism campaign, trying to sort of persuade the mainstream media to actually talk about the fact that 20% of the world's population consumes 80% of its resources. It's not a very pleasant experience going on the media and being treated as sort of nutter of the week, yeah? Because you're just articulating what are basically facts. So I do understand the political position that people are coming from, and I know that you care passionately about issues of social justice, and you're just appalled by the way in which the world is moving, because it seems like the neocons who have no compassion for others have really consolidated power over the world. So I do get that. I'm not coming from a right-wing position. So I just wanted to really, really kind of emphasize that, just in case anybody does sort of want to denounce me as, you know, like a traitor to the cause. So going on to the technical stuff, I mean, Steve's right, there's just tons of it. When you start looking into it, it feels like you're chasing rabbits down holes. You know, you're dealing with one accusation or claim, and then you've got to look at the counter evidence to that, the skeptic's point of view. Then you've got to go back again and see what people are saying about the skeptic's point of view. And you're swinging backwards and forwards. It's really quite a strange, interesting experience to look into these issues. But I've got to admit, at the end of the day, it hasn't convinced me for the following reasons. And I'll try and deal with just 4 main topics, really. The first is the free fall argument here. Now, I know that lots of different people who are making the controlled demolition claim, their points of view vary. Not everybody's saying that the World Trade Center 1 and 2 fell at free fall speed. Other people are saying that they did fall at free fall speed. I certainly think that Steve is saying that Building 7 definitely did fall at free fall speed. That's definitely your point of view, yeah? But you're not 100% sure about 1 and 2? Or?
Well, I'm sure about 1 and 2, and I'm sure that they didn't fall at free fall speed. They're actually, Chandler again has measured it, and I've measured it as well, but I've not been as precise as Chandler has, but I've measured it, and it's 36% below free fall.
Okay. Just see if I can bring up
which is demonstrative of resistance.
I'm just checking that I had understood you carefully. So for free fall speed, you can actually look at visual evidence for that and sort of see that this is World Trade Center 1 and 2, these images. You've got chunks of debris, yeah, which are falling through the air, which is free fall speed. Obviously you've got a bit of air resistance, but essentially it's the speed that things will accelerate downwards according to gravity. Now if the towers themselves were falling at free fall speed, I would imagine that the sections of the tower that are collapsing downwards, yeah, would actually be at the same level. But you can quite clearly see that these are much further down, that the towers are you know, actually a bit higher than these chunks. I don't know how clear it is in that image, but the second one, you can see down here, chunks of debris have clearly made their way down, falling through the air. But the towers themselves, which I think are about that point, are actually still much higher. So you've actually got objects moving at free fall speed through the air, and these are photographs from sites that advocate the controlled demolition theory. They're not from Skeptics sites. You do seem to have objects falling. I hope everybody else will be able to spot them if I just quickly go through a group of photos. So again, down in this corner here, you can clearly see a chunk of the building is a good deal further down than the actual structure of the building itself. That's because it's fallen at free fall speed. So that does mean that the rest of the tower isn't. But I won't spend too long on that. That's just one more very, very clear example. I think where you've got, you know, clearly sections of the tower are still standing here, and other objects have dropped much faster. So just by looking at those photos, I think it's clear that the towers didn't fall at free fall speed, or at least that's what I think is a correct conclusion. Okay, then there's the second one of World Trade Center 7. Okay? Now, World Trade Center 7 is the smoking gun. I understand why you focus on it, because it wasn't hit by an airplane. I mean, that's very, very clear. It wasn't struck by an airplane, whereas the first two were. But it was struck by debris that came off the main towers. It hit the south side of the building and actually cut quite a big gouge into it, according to eyewitnesses. Secondly, you've got this idea...
virus database has been updated.
Josh.
No, I think that was funny. I'll take 15 seconds out for the laugher in the audience. But you've got this argument that it wasn't actually burning that much. I mean, that was one of the things I kept encountering when I was looking at controlled demolition sites, that there weren't many fires within the building. Well, I don't think that's actually true. If you look at the picture of the building, which is obviously the kind of pinkish one in this picture, there's a great deal of smoke coming out of it. And that, to me, indicates that there are actually fires in the building. There's another set of photos here where you've got flames coming out the windows and you've got more smoke coming out, which is obviously being generated by something. And now I think that's fires. Yeah? So if you've got a combination of structural damage to Building 7, and you've got fires burning in it, and of course you've also got fuel tanks in the building which are powering the heating systems. which, according to people, you know, like who are technical experts on this, say that the hoses on those were broken and there was fuel being spilt into the building. Now, you've then got to address the whole issue of steel, because I keep coming across this argument from people who advocate controlled demolition that steel can't possibly melt at the kind of temperatures that the tower's fires were burning at. But the trouble is, nobody's actually saying that. I've never actually come across a site, even NIST, aren't saying that steel melted. What they're saying is that steel changes when you heat it. It doesn't melt, but it does start to lose its structural strength because you're heating it up. Yeah? It softens before it melts. So at a temperature of, that starts to happen at about 400 degrees centigrade. You'll find that the steel does start to lose its structural strength. When you get up to a temperature of 1,000 degrees centigrade, it's actually lost 80% of its structural strength. It's no longer the rigid stuff that we associate with steel girders, quite rightly, because they obviously are extremely strong objects, otherwise you wouldn't use them to build buildings like that in the first place. So all you need really to say is that it softens, and that means it's no longer able to hold weight. And these buildings are of an extraordinary size. I mean, I'm sure people are familiar with the Beetham Tower, this massive thing that is a bit like the Twin Trade Towers, you know, towering over Manchester, almost like a symbol of corporate power. But the Beetham, I mean, it is. I often look at it and I sometimes see airplanes flying into it, which is a terrible thing to think, but I do look at it and I think, my God, I get the symbolism of it. Beetham is 551 feet tall, yeah? But World Trade 7, yeah, is actually 610 foot tall. So it's a massive building with an extraordinary amount of weight being held by beams inside it that have to stay solid. If they're not melting, but they're softening, that means that they're going to collapse. They're going to lose their structural strength. And the same applies to the girders that you've got where the airplanes hit the main two towers. First of all, an airplane moving into a building like that is going to damage some of those columns even before the fires start, but it's also going to strip away their fireproofing. One of the reasons why there's so much emphasis on fireproofing of steel, which is why you get this, in the flat where I live, you can actually see the steel girders. They're painted in what's called tumescent paint. It's this kind of strange, thick, grey paint. When it's exposed to heat, it'll expand like a foam, and it'll actually protect those steel girders from heat. That's one of the things why you don't get many steel towers actually collapsing, because that insulation foam will protect them from softening. It'll protect them from losing their structural strength. But that gets stripped away by an airplane hitting a building, smashing its way through the building. It'll just tear away the foam coating around these girders, exposing them to heat that can't melt them. 1,000 degrees will not melt steel, but it will mean that it's lost 80% of its structural strength. That means it just simply cannot hold the weight of all the floors above it any longer. It'll sag, and the whole top section of the buildings will start plummeting through the sections below, a bit like the demolition video that Steve showed us, where they exploded the charges halfway down the building. You saw that the top section then drove its way through the sections below it with no further explosions needed. That's what happened to the two main towers, and it's also what happened to Building 7.